With the ladder dropping fairly soon, and a good idea of what the 2.4 patch is going to bring, the question becomes, what build should you use when you start the ladder? So today we're going to look at what I would recommend as your first ladder character in each class, so you can choose your favorite and run with it on day one. I should note, these are my personal picks, and there are a lot of other viable options. These are basically chosen for ease of play, versatility, solo self-found capability, and effectiveness at completing the game, so you can then either stay with the build for general farming, or switch over to a more specialized build for target farming, without needing to stress about immunities or hazards. Starting with the most obvious, and the one most people will likely pick, that is the Sorceress. While most people will be ending the ladder with a Blizzard Orb Sorceress or even a Lightning Sorceress so they can farm that prized gear for trading, the build I would actually go with while working your way through to the end of Hell would be a Fire Cold Sorceress. This is because they are the easiest to kit out dual elemental sorceress, and for me specifically, this would actually be the Fireball Hydra Orb combo, starting out in normal with mostly Firebolt and Fireball with a Leaf Staff, moving to Nightmare and investing in Orb itself for an easy progression there as you get yourself a Spirit Sword and an Insight Mercenary, and then switching into Hydra with your already existing Fireball as a synergy and Orb as backup damage against fire immunes, while hoping you can get your Spirit Shield as you progress through Hell. After that, I would use my first Respect to set up for farming in a specific location, and then churn away from there. After that, we move to the Paladin pick, which with the changes in 2.4 actually becomes a much easier decision for me, and that is the Fist of the Heavens Paladin, with your choice of Zealot or Smiter as your secondary focus. This build is much more resource friendly and can go without using your respecs even into the end game farming, meaning you can swap up your setup easier should you wish to change to focus on specific farming targets. Though since this can farm both Act 4 and Act 5 in Hell easily, it's very reliable for anything you'd need. With this build, I would get some basic points in Holy Bolt early on, while getting a minimal number of points in things such as Zeal, Smite, and the prerequisites for your future skills, and run it hybrid from the beginning with Holy Bolt for killing demons, bosses, and undead, and Zeal cleaning up the trash. And you can use the charge to aid your movement speed to get to places quicker. And as you progress into Nightmare, you should be able to easily get double Spirit and an Insight Mercenary for dirt cheap, and invest more properly into Holy Bolt and Fist of the Heavens, and start getting your Fanaticism up afterwards, as well as your Holy Shield, of course. And this gear will tide you over for the rest of the game, allowing you to farm almost anywhere to your heart's content, and as you get used to the build, you'll be able to farm literally anything in the game effectively, while upgrading your gear as you go. You can even get a Black Club to actually get Crushing Blow and handle the Ubers and get those early torches for early resources. On the Necromancer, I would start with the Summoner, since this is easily the best low-budget build for the Necromancer for going without bothering on respecs throughout the game, and provided you farm enough, you will eventually be able to upgrade to a Poison Summoner if you get the right gear, which is one of the most relaxed farmers in the game, that much like the Paladin can farm literally anywhere in the game with ease. That said, normal difficulty will be your biggest hurdle with this build. You'll want to invest heavily in skeletons, but prepare a Clay Golem, Golem Mastery, and 1 point into Iron Maiden for dealing with the bosses in normal, especially ones like Duriel and Diablo that rely heavily on melee attacks. As you move into Nightmare, focus on those plus skills, aiming for a White Wand, a good Necro Head if you can find it, and an Act 2 Thorns Mercenary for boss fights, since it will help you clear out them that much faster than Might would with like the Poverty gear that you're going to be using. Insight is also a good addition on him here, since it's going to be an Act 2 Mercenary, just throw it in a polearm, but you can get away without it because you can just chug potions. There's nothing like super spammy and intense on your mana here. Your main cycle for normal enemies will be Amplify Damage to get your first kill, then Corpse Explosion to spread pain, and Amplify Damage again against Act bosses since you don't have any corpses to rely on. This will be how you go through the rest of the game, and this is how you can farm most areas, but it is fairly quick at cows if you need something easy to farm. If you're finding you're having trouble with positioning, be sure to pick up a Teleport Staff for swap. This can be shopped in late normal, but the easiest place to shop is Drognin in Act 2 Nightmare when he spawns next to a door, which just so happens to pair well with the need for teleport in Maggot Lair. The Druid is the next on the list. With some of the changes, we can actually make some interesting builds out of it. But the way things are now, I would actually lean towards the Fire Wolf Druid, since it's pretty easy to get a reasonable amount of physical damage and pair it with a truly massive amount of fire damage. And it also preserves your respecs for later, so you can decide where you want to shift your build to farm after beating the game. Depending on what gear you find, you can have a lot of options there, and you still have the flexibility for upgrading later without using tokens. In normal, you'll build much like a standard Firecaster Druid, though you'll start by focusing on slightly different skills, Firestorm and Molten Boulder being your super early tools instead of Fissure. Though if you want to stay Caster and Nightmare, you can invest in that as well. It will synergize with things later, but the ultimate goal of this build will be to use those skills for early progress, then as we approach the end of normal, switch over to shifting into Werewolf and using Fireclaw, and taking advantage of already having sunk a reasonable amount of points into its direct synergies. After that, we move down the fire side of the tree and invest in Armageddon for area of effect damage. While we likely won't find an amazing physical damage weapon while going through solo self-found, you can make some fairly solid mid-tier rune words and use your fire as a primary killing method, Armageddon for crowd control, and only really rely on physical aspects when you have to deal with fire immunes. Probably your least likely pick for the start of the ladder is going to be your Barbarian, and for this, there's a few ways you can progress, but generally speaking, the most productive one is going to be the Berserker, and unfortunately, like most Barbarian builds, you will still be constrained by weapon selections and attack rating, but this at least gives you a reasonable amount of damage of a good element type, and leaves you a good number of points to mess around with to adapt your build, not to mention its synergies are a bit nicer now than they were before. Starting out in normal, you'll likely want to choose your core weapon type, usually sword or mace, and focus on that mastery, picking up your 1-point wonders and using whatever skills you have access to already for combat as you go. Just keep hitting things with a big stick, basically. As you progress into Nightmare, you'll start investing in things such as Berserk and Battle Orders to get yourself up to a durable setup, while doing decent damage with the best one-handed weapon you can get and a shield ideally, though if you can't get a solid one-handed weapon, a two-hander is fine until Hell, when you really want to start using that shield for resists. As you get into Hell, you will have leftover points and can start investing in support skills like Battle Cry or Find Item depending on your preference, or even War Cry if you want some stun for protection. And as far as Mercenary choice, this actually varies. If you have enough attack rating, the Act 2 Might Mercenary might be good. If you're feeling squishy, bring an Act 5 Mercenary with you, and they can even provide things like Battle Cry or Taunt to help you survive a little bit better, and Battle Cry actually helps your damage output as well by lowering enemy defense. Or if you want someone to just stay back and out of the way, an Act 1 Rogue can actually lower enemy defense pretty easily as well, and can use a Harmony Bow to give you some solid movement speed buffs. You could also actually put things such as Lawbringer on the Act 5 Mercenary for penetrating physical immunes if you do still use a physical support skill along with Berserk. Moving into the home stretch, we have the Assassin, probably still one of my favorite picks for new players. It does sit fairly middle of the pack whenever it comes to ladder running, trading blows with the Necromancer in terms of position. The build I would recommend with this is a bog standard Trapper with kick support for damage variance and mobility. To stick with our theme of conserving our respecs so we can later use them for focusing on farming based on what we want or need, I would start off by getting some of your starting points into Fire Blast and your Dragon Talon. This will make normal a bit slower, but with bursts of speed you can make up for a lot of it by simply running faster through areas than most classes. Though if you want to use a respec, going the standard Wake of Fire Trap method through normal is quite effective and a bit faster, but you will be down to 2 respecs in your endgame because you'll be using one in early Nightmare. Because in Nightmare, we start investing in the lightning traps to deal with the majority of enemies at a range, and of course, getting Death Sentry for the corpse explosion. Then we continue to do this into Hell, just taking the traps up to 11, and making sure to try and get a black runeward club for crushing blow on the kicks along the way to help us with our boss killing speed. And last but far from least on this list is the Amazon, one of the better characters for starting your way through normal and Nightmare, but it does start to feel gear stress in Hell if you don't go dual elemental or find something with crushing blow for use with jab, because we are of course going with javelins because they are by far the most powerful option, and honestly you can beat the game with your starter javelins and not feel too much slowdown. Here there are 2 options, but probably the safer one is pure Lightning Javazon through all 3 difficulties using Charge Strike on bosses and Lightning Strike or Lightning Fury for crowds, depending on if you have ample javelin supplies or replenishing javelins. Switching to jab for dealing with lightning immunes, though with the addition of changes to fend and impale, these can actually be okay options for different types of lightning immunes as well. The option that I would personally do, which is more so out of curiosity, would be the Poison Lightning Hybrid build, which focuses on maxing out your Poison Javelin skills in normal and trying ferociously to get replenishing javelins, while investing in the melee lightning skills like Charge Strike for boss killing specifically. This does have the nice advantage of keeping you, for the most part, from getting locked down by dual immunes, with only a few select enemies being dual immune to both lightning and poison, though admittedly one of those is the nightmare that is Hell Gloams in Act 5 Worldstone. Overall, as it stands, there are plenty of no-respec solo self-found variants out there, so you can choose the class you want to go through with and have a reasonable amount of success, while preserving your respecs for adapting based on the gear you get and what you want to do later on. These are just the 7 that I would recommend to new or intermediate ladder climbers who don't have teams to cover their weaknesses. There are faster, trickier builds, like what are used for speedrunning, as well as team builds that can blow these out of the water, but for your first few forays into ladder climbing and a new economy, these will get you started on the path to success and get you used to the process, while still giving you the flexibility to not only pursue the levels you want, but also farm the items you want for the ladder season.